I've talked about how important story is for the game, especially a game like an MMO. World of Warcraft, to me, it has to have a good story to really keep the player base, going. Yes, gameplay matters, of course, mechanics matter. All of that has to be good. But when you got good gameplay mechanics and a really shit story, it still makes you feel disconnected. When you got both doing really good at the same time, that's when the game is like, it's a chef's kiss. Everybody's into it, everyone's immersed in it, everyone's playing. But it feels like immersion has died. Nixium here with the death of immersion and good fantasy. Let's see what this video is all about, because I think he's getting at a lot of the same things I have been with World of Warcraft lately.
In many of my previous World of Warcraft videos, where I talk about underrated villains from classic WoW or zones that put terror into the hearts of the community, I have often used the word enchantment and escapism, and many of you have picked up on this. The fact that often in my writings about classic WoW or MMOs or just role-playing games in general, these two terms tend to escape from my fingers and my lips all too often. And the thing is, many people, when you use these terms around them, they don't actually know what they mean, nor do they realize that these two things are the bedrock foundation of a good fantasy, a good fairy story, or a good role-playing game. So today I want to talk about these two things, why they are so important, and I also want to give special acknowledgement to J.R.R. Tolkien and his very famous essay on fairy stories, which goes into much greater detail on these two subjects,
Tolkien's
far
a badass.
more than I intend to do in this video. I highly recommend you check it out. And perhaps with this video, I can even give a proper definition to a feeling that many of you likely have experienced at some point in your life, but maybe you didn't know the right words on how to describe it. You'll see what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, look, before he gets into it here, immersion has always mattered to me a lot, no doubt. I mean, my favorite way to play this game, although like I play it on stream and I'll play music in the background and we're chatting the entire time and we're doing stuff in the game, but like my favorite way to play this game has always been headphones on, music turned all the way up, and I mean in-game music. I got full ambience going, and I am just wandering through a forest. Like, I get so into it. I love being fully immersed in Azeroth. That's the thing that captured me from the very beginning, is how immersive the game was. I still remember making my first ever Night Elf. Yeah, a Night Elf Hunter was my first character. Surprise, real original, right? I wanted to be Legolas from Lord of the Rings. And I'm running around in Teldrassil and all these zones, and the music is just so enveloping, and the sounds of the forests and it was just so immersive, and that's why I loved playing this game. And that's why I still say till now, if you want the game to be good, it has to be immersive. And in order to be immersive, everything has to work together. The mechanics got to be good, the music's got to be good, the story's got to be good. And when you get that perfect mixture, man, you get caught up in the game so much that you become a lifer. You just want to play it nonstop.
A long time ago, when I was a kid, I went to my grandparents' house up in Kentucky with my mother and father. And while I was there, we briefly went to visit my aunt, and my parents, they left me alone at her house while the adults went and did whatever it is they were doing. Well, I was bored, and I started wandering around her home, wondering on what I could do, until eventually I found her collection of VHS tapes. Yes, I'm a little bit old, and I decided that I was going to watch a movie. I looked through, all the films that she had, and eventually I settled on one, a movie that I had heard was really good, but I had never seen it. I took this movie out of its case, I put it into the VHS player, turned on the TV, and I began to watch The Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers.
Ooh.
And you know what?
He jumped straight into The Two Towers. I mean, that's a good one. But man, yeah, it's the Lord of the Rings franchise. I still remember my dad and we went to Blockbuster and actually bought the DVD. We didn't rent it. We bought it because we were like, well, this is, everyone says this is really good. We're just going to buy it so we can keep it. And we didn't watch it in the theater. I did not watch The Fellowship of the Rings in the theater. The first version of Lord of the Rings I watched in the theaters was The Two Towers. But we got The Fellowship, 3-hour movie. I still remember my mom had gone to sleep. My sister was a baby at the time. She was asleep. And it was just me, my brother, and my dad. And it was like 10 o'clock at night, and he was like, hey, you guys want to watch that movie that we bought today? I'm like, yeah, he put it in, and it fucking changed my life forever. That was my first introduction to like high fantasy, and I freaking loved it. I absolutely loved it. And the thing is, it was like a 2 or 3 DVD set, at the time, and we didn't realize the second DVD was like a special edition looking at how the movie was made. We thought that was the second movie. And after watching 3 hours, it was like 1 a.m. at the time by the time the movie finished. We thought the second DVD was the second movie. So we were like, hey, you guys want to watch the second movie? That's what my dad said. We were like, yeah, we put it in. We thought it was the Two Towers already before it had even come out. And we realized it was just about how they made the movie thing. But that's how into it we got. At 1 o'clock, we wanted to watch another 3 hours. And that shit forever changed my life. And that's what actually got me into WoW. That was why I started playing WoW. Again, I wanted to be Legolas from Lord of the Rings.
I started watching this movie and I didn't understand a thing of what was going on. There were some guys like trying to find some two little dudes being carried by some monsters, and two dudes talking to this like weird monster looking creature that they found while out in the mountains. I didn't understand at all what was going on. And eventually I turned the movie off and I said, this is garbage. Well, a little while later, while I was back at home and I was back to school, I was riding the bus one day and I was talking to a new friend I had just made whose name was Alan Schmidt. And on this particular morning, I learned that Alan was a really big fan of The Lord of the Rings.
Smart
and
guy.
I told him, I said, you know, Alan, I tried watching those movies and I couldn't get into it. Nothing made sense and I just thought it was kind of stupid. And he began to ask me, he was like, how could you say that? Like, what was it about it that you didn't like? And I began to explain the plot that I experienced. And only after a few moments, Alan stopped me and he said, Nixium, your problem is that you watched the second movie, or started watching the second movie.
That's true, he did.
Before you watched the first. No wonder you were so confused. No wonder you didn't like it. Well, that Friday, Alan invited me over to his house to spend the night for the very first time.
Watch
and
Fellowship.
He said that we were going to watch The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
So good. I'll never forget. I think I have like a canon moment in my head where I really got captured by high fantasy. And if you guys remember, it was when, you know, the Fellowship comes together for the first time and they head out on an adventure to get the ring to Mordor, right? And there's this moment, I still remember it, and I'll always remember it because I got freaking massive goosebumps at the time. And remember, like, I'm a kid at this time. It was when the Fellowship, when the group of them are running along, you know, it's like that classic Lord of the Rings scene. They're running along the top of a mountain, and the camera's panning around in a circle, and you hear the music kick. It's like burr, 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 and it went off. And I'm watching these guys go out on an adventure. And it just triggered something inside me. It was like, damn, man, I want to go on an adventure. This is amazing. And I still remember it. I got goosebumps, and I was so into it. I remember smiling, watching it, and I was like, holy shit, this movie is amazing. And it was just that moment where I got really captured into this whole high fantasy, going out into an open world adventure. That was a big moment for me. I'll never forget it.
I got my parents' permission, we went over to his home, I rolled out my sleeping bag in the living room, and we sat down with some popcorn and whatever else, and we started to watch this movie. And to say that The Lord of the Rings absolutely blew my mind was an understatement. Shortly thereafter, I had watched Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers. A little bit after that, I finished the trilogy by watching Return of the King, and I knew that these three films were going to be some of my favorite movies that I had ever watched for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
And turns out I was right. And you know, after watching The Lord of the Rings, something came over my younger self, and I didn't really exactly know how to define it. I started going out into the woods, and oftentimes I would pick up a stick and I would pretend to be Aragorn, and I would be fighting orcs, pretending that all the trees that surrounded me were these monsters, Uruk-hai and trolls and so on. In my free time, I was drawing maps of the Shire and what Moria might have looked like from above, and I dreamed of these far-off misty mountains in the distance that I felt like I could almost...
I still remember, I drew out an entire adventure book. I made my own hero and everything, and I drew maps of what this fantasy land would look like. I tried to make my own Tolkien universe. It was something that I got so into at the time, and I even remember, like, Halloween came around later on in the year, and me and my cousins, we went to a Halloween store, and we bought a bunch of bows and swords and shit. There were 4 of us, and that night I slept over my uncle's house with my brother. All 4 of us were in the same house, and we pretended to be the Fellowship. one of us had an axe, I had the bow, my brother had a sword, and we were just pretending to chop down orcs like all night. That was all we did. I think we were like 12 years old at the time, maybe. It was a good time, though.
Touch them, but they were just out of reach. Like they were just beyond
probably
the
younger.
horizon.
It's probably like
if
8.
I just traveled far enough, I would find them. And you know, this feeling, this sense of wonder that the Lord of the Rings gave me, this sense that this was a real place at one point in history, or a real place just hidden behind a veil whose, form I didn't know how to peel back from my eyes. I didn't really know how to describe that feeling, so I just considered myself a fan. And in those days, as I was growing up, I would often use the Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth as a type of happy place, if we want to use that term.
Yeah.
I would just go to that corner of my mind and I would fall into Middle-earth and I would escape. And all the troubles of school and girls and friend drama, it would all just fade away for a time. By this point, too, in my life, I was also playing World of Warcraft, which I also found to be very immersive for me. It gave me a very similar experience with all of its different races, with different stories, this huge world.
I actually think WoW owes a lot of its success to Lord of the Rings and the series. I think it came out like a perfect storm where like Lord of the Rings had broken through and made high fantasy a normalized thing. Because before it was just like a nerd niche. Like not a lot of people were into wizards and dragons and shit like that. That was considered like a very fringe thing to be into. And then Lord of the Rings came out and it brought that to the forefront. Like multiple awards given to the movie. It was something that people who had never been into fantasy sat down and actually watched. Young Sam was bald. No, so I did check the date. It was like 2002 that I probably watched The Fellowship of the Ring. So I would have been like 12 years old. And yeah, I think it galvanized a lot of people and got a lot of people into high fantasy. So when World of Warcraft came out, it was like the only option out there if you wanted to play in a Lord of the Rings style story. And that was why I got it. I'm sure that's why a lot of people got it. There were a lot of, for sure, Lord of the Rings fans that picked up World of Warcraft and started playing it because they were Lord of the Rings fans.
Of adventure and different landscapes to explore, the music and the ambience. I loved it. And this game too, whenever I would play it when I was younger, it as well filled me with this sense of great imagination, and I would draw pictures of my characters and write simple stories of adventures through the various zones of Azeroth. At this point, The Lord of the Rings, they were my 3 favorite movies, and also World of Warcraft had quickly become my favorite video game that I had ever played. And as I got older, I started to seek out this undefined feeling in any game that I played or TV show or book that I read. I was looking for these stories and adventures and whatever that could capture me in the way that the Lord of the Rings and classic WoW had all those years ago. And I especially sought out these worlds and experiences whenever I went through a period of great stress or sadness or whatever sort of struggle I was going through growing up. Even in my later teenage years, I still didn't know exactly what it was I was looking for. I just enjoyed fantasy as far as I understood things. That was until one day...
Yeah, and I've talked about that before on stream, that I love that sense of I'm going on an adventure. I don't know what it is. I call it a childish thing, call it like an innate human instinct. Maybe it's a male instinct. I have no idea, but it's something about like my heart desires this whole thing of going on an adventure, going into the unknown, going out and completing a quest. I don't know what it is, but it's always something that like the Lord of the Rings franchise has touched on, World of Warcraft for me has touched on, where I just get that sense of I'm fulfilling that feeling of I'm going out on an adventure to an unexplored land, into unexplored territories where danger is lurking around any corner, like that kind of stuff. And that's why the WoW franchise, Lord of the Rings, those have always been there as a source of like, oh, this is what I want. This calls out to my soul. There's something about it.
After high school, while I was in college, I read Tolkien's essay on fairy stories, which finally gave proper words to this feeling that I had experienced while watching Lord of the Rings or playing classic WoW back when I was younger. What I had experienced is what Tolkien would call enchantment and escapism. Now, Tolkien, he describes enchantment as a type of fairy magic in this essay. And it's something that occurs when a person is pulled into a secondary created world, pulled out from our world, which he calls the primary world. Tolkien describes it like a prisoner who is in a cell, who is dreaming of the world outside, the beauty of it all, and what sort of sights and smells and sounds the prisoner might be able to capture with his senses as he perceives the world outside. And all of us, Tolkien would argue at least, have a deep need for this feeling, a deep need for escapism and enchantment. But I'll talk about why in a moment. First of all, I'll say that the act of creating one of these secondary worlds, however, capable of actually producing enchantment in the person who reads it or watches it or plays it in the form of a video game, this is incredibly difficult. Especially nowadays, it's a very common criticism that there are so many forms of entertainment out there where the author or the director or the developer, they only care about creating a product that appeals to as many people as possible to make as much money as possible. And so the world and its story and its characters and its immersive quality is just pushed to the side as a secondary or an unnecessary element.
Yeah, today's industry is just always afraid of taking a financial risk. That's why we get Toy Story 13 and Jurassic Park 7 and all this other shit. Is they're afraid to start a new franchise because you got to invest money. Like today, looking at what Lord of the Rings did, or even like say Star Wars did, where it's this high fantasy niche that it's not a mainstream thing. But when Star Wars was made, and Star Wars is another franchise that I love, or when Lord of the Rings was made, they just went all in. They were like, we're going to give this a major budget. We're going into this high fantasy story, and we're going to try to make a really good movie. And then the appeal to the audience just happened. Like, they did not know what to expect. For sure, when Lord of the Rings was being made, and all this money was being dumped into it, they didn't know that it was going to be what it was. Same with Star Wars. They didn't know that it was going to be what it was. They just put love and, yes, money into a product, and when it came out, the audience recognized it right away and was totally immersed in it. And today, it's like all these movie dev and these companies, these game dev companies, they're afraid to do that shit. They're afraid to take the risk of jumping into a new franchise, telling a new story, or getting into any of that stuff because there's so much money involved. If it falls flat, they're afraid of what all the money they could lose. Whereas if they just make a second version of something that was already proven to be successful, it's like a more guarantee. It's like all those Disney live actions. Like Disney doesn't want to tell new stories. They just want to make a live action version of something that was already proven to be successful because that's a more sure bet. That's a problem with the whole industry right now.
The production. Or in many cases today, we have developers that seem more interested in lecturing the viewer about a particular issue rather than creating an actual world for that person to fall into and be a part of. I often see people criticizing modern video games for inserting unnecessary political dialogue, revising history, or just doing things that are unnecessary that immediately breaks the enchantment of the game. I can even use World of Warcraft as an example. Now, World of Warcraft, it might not be a game that you yourself play or enjoy, but I think I can use it as an example of what I'm getting at here. When you compare the original game to the modern game, Classic WoW, which is the original game, it's more about discovering a greater world full of stories and diverse peoples and perspectives with no clear objective answer as to who is the most good or most evil, whose ideas or worldview is more superior and whose are lacking. You have groups like the Forsaken who seek to turn their enemies and even their allies into undead to make everybody just as ugly as they are. Night Elves, they struggle with being in an alliance with younger, lesser races of Azeroth, as they would put it, considering that many Night Elves are thousands of years old. Orcs, they're being led by a war chief who is raised by humans who doesn't even truly understand Orcish traditions and culture. All across Azeroth, there are all these different peoples, all these different conflicts, creating war, creating tension, creating real drama that actually can pull at your heartstrings, make you think, or allow you to be more immersed into the world as you insert yourself into greater conflicts. And all I gave you is just 3 examples of 3 small groups in this massive world of stories and adventure.
Yeah.
And now compare that to the game today. Today, we have the Draenei race and the orcs. They are working together to defeat Xalatath, the current primary antagonist, despite the fact that the orcs nearly wiped out the entire Draenei race from existence in a mass genocide event. The evidence of which is the Path of Glory in Hellfire Peninsula. These are the bodies of all the men, women, and children the orcs killed all across Draenor, and yet for some reason, it's as if the Draenei no longer care. Night Elves, I mentioned them before, they have now...
Look, I know, Odie, you're just like, this guy's so stupid, no offense. Look, it's, there is a sense of... The stories, I don't know, the hatred between the races, all of it, it just made more sense. Whereas now it's more of a kumbaya. Now, the one thing I think that Nixium doesn't really consider is these otherworldly threats that show up. This is natural. It just tends to unite the people of the planet. Yes, they didn't like each other. Yes, the orcs were in a blood rage where they drank demon blood and slaughtered a bunch of Draenei on the path. And yeah, it's literally, if you look at that path, it's all skeletons. It's just dead people. But when it becomes like a whole, well, if we don't fight this enemy together, we're all going to die, that'll tend to kind of erase past issues and just, whether or not they like each other, they're going to fight that enemy together. That's kind of what's happening. I don't think right now that Draenei and orcs like each other. I don't think that's what's going on at all. I just think they both realize that if we don't fight off this void threat, we're all dead. So this is just a survival thing. This is just that we're going to get together and try to survive this, and we can fuck off after. We don't have to deal with each other after, but for now, we got to fight this thing together. Garrosh did nothing wrong. Well, Garrosh was a true orc. I mean, he believed that the orcs were superior, just like any other person for any other race, and he wanted to just be an orcish horde again. And, that was what it was. He didn't really kick out, by the way, the Tauren and all that. They were just against him. They just didn't like what he was doing, so he had to deal with them. And just remember, I mean, he didn't challenge Karen Bloodhoof to a fight. Karen challenged him. I could get into the freaking whole Garrosh thing again, but we'll leave that for another video. Some died. Thanos was right. I mean, cleansing half the universe. There's that whole thing too. But at the end of the day, the one thing that I think people just glaze over too much with World of Warcraft, or when they want to talk shit about WoW, they'll be like, well, everyone's friends now. And I disagree. I don't think everyone's friends now. I just think they're all fighting a common enemy. And when that common enemy is gone, they're going to go back to their burrows and their trees and their other shit and not deal with each other again.
Accepted mages into their ranks. Now keep in mind, back in the day, you couldn't play as a Night Elf mage. And why? Because for 10,000 years in the lore, these people have had a deep distrust of arcane magic due to it being the reason that the world was sundered and broken into the continents that you see here. And it was because of arcane magic that the Burning Legion was first able to enter Azeroth, almost plunging the entire world into demonic corruption and death.
Well, he's right about that. The whole, Night Elves using magic, like what's going on. But Garrosh was right about another thing. Garrosh said times change. And he's not wrong. Yes, something can remain the same for thousands of years, but eventually it can change over time. And I think that's what's happened with the Night Elves. Again, picking up magic to fight a threat that they realize they're going to need to dabble in some things they didn't want to dabble in before because they got to fight off this new threat.
It's why the Night Elves are so druidic in the first place rather than magical arcane users like they used to be. 10,000 years of no tolerance in their society towards the arcane. However, all that lore is gone simply because the consumer wants to play a Night Elf mage. And so now all that established lore that was built up over many years, books, quests, and stories, it all doesn't matter now. Or we can just be very broad with it. How about how every expansion is all about how all the people of the world just need to come together as a big family, to quote the Dragonflight expansion, to defeat the next big nobody cares villain. Now, it is true that since the days of...
I think the story's gotten better, and heading into Midnight here, I think it's going to continue to get better. Metzin's back, so I think we're going to get a better, not, it's not an enemy that nobody cares about. I think Xalatath's been drummed up pretty well, and we're going to see where she goes from here on out. But again, the whole everybody's friends now, I still disagree with. I just think everyone's fighting a common enemy, and they will go back to being enemies again very quickly. I think like Tyrellian and all these Scarlets and all this light shit could easily redivide the Horde and Alliance. I think those ties are still deep and they're still there. I don't think it means their lore has been erased. Now, was Dragonflight's lore too friendly, too mishy-mushy? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, maybe it was. It was. But I don't think that means that all the ancient lore of WoW is gone and erased.
Warcraft 3, the World of Warcraft universe has always kind of been about these different factions uniting to fight a common threat. And yet, over the years, as the various races of Azeroth have lost their unique identity, the story that Blizzard Entertainment created that used to move and inspire and immerse so many, it's just been watered down to a very generic story that serves only to waste your time, rather than present to you an actual world of many peoples to fall into. At least in my opinion. Friends, it is a criticism that exists not just in World of Warcraft, but in many game universes, many television shows, many books, and many films. So many universes that we used to delight in have been degraded to nothing more than teenage tier soap operas, rather than actual rich fantasy. And you want to know why? Because so many creators all around the world have lost their sense of creating enchantment and escapism. Now, I know that some of you are probably going to ask how to create good enchantment or escapism in a game or a movie or whatever, and that is something I'd love to talk about, but probably in a separate video. If that's something that you guys would like to see, just leave a comment down below. But I know there's also probably a lot of you sitting there thinking, who cares? I mean, after all, you know, this sort of stuff, the falling into one's imagination, some of you think it seems very childish and naive, pointless. It's something that many people condemn because they see escape.
I personally think he's missing a big point here in the loss of enchantment and escapism, and I don't necessarily think it's just like wokeism that came in and ruined it all. I really think that the fact that high fantasy went mainstream, that it became something that, like, you can look at it, say corporate greed is the eye of Sauron, right? And high fantasy stories and all that were really underground. Like, it wasn't something that was considered mainstream, wasn't something that could be considered to make money off of. And then Lord of the Rings came out, and World of Warcraft came out, and the Eye of Sauron, it caught the Eye of Sauron's attention, right? And it looked at it and realized, oh, there can be money. There's money to be made out of high fantasy. You could even say the same for comic book hero stories and everything. It's the same thing, where once corporate greed got in, and they realized, like, oh, these stories of wizards and dragons, or these stories of superheroes, we can make money off of this. That's when it stopped being this whole, you know, adventure into love and these stories written from the heart and all that. And it became, well, we just got to make more money. We can't take risks and write all these crazy new stories. We got to make more money. So let's gray it all out. Let's not do anything too controversial. Let's just keep it simple, stupid, and let's just ride out whatever we've made. We don't want to do anything too new. Let's just ride it out for what it is right now and make as much money as possible. I think that's where things went wrong. I really don't think that it's like, oh, bad creators, bad shit, all this stupid wokeism getting into everything. I really just think it's all about the dollar. And maybe that's because I work in corporate America and that's how I look at it. It's a cynical way of looking at things. But I just think once the dollar gets into something, it tends to ruin it. It just does. It takes out all the creativity, takes out all the love, takes out all the deep, you know, stories and all that, and it just becomes a very much just a profit-driven empire. And that's what we've seen in a lot of fantasy movies and fantasy games.
And enchantment as being simple distraction, not real, pointless, a waste of time. This is something Tolkien talks about very extensively in his essay. Let's return to Tolkien, because I mentioned before that he discussed in his essay that escapism and enchantment, they are necessary to our lives. And in fact, it is one of the purest art forms that one can experience. And let me explain to you why. Why do we need stories like The Lord of the Rings that can capture the imaginations of young boys and girls all around the world? Why is it such a big deal that so many of the worlds and the stories that we are creating today are lacking in enchanting and escaping quality? Let me put it this way. Most of you, according to my analytics behind the scenes here on YouTube, most of you are men. Men between the age of 25 and 35. And gentlemen, let me speak
35-year-old
to
man.
you as one of you. Sometimes life is kind of a bitch. Life is hard. Life is cruel sometimes. It's rugged, it's not clean. And as we wrestle with the responsibilities of our jobs or taking care of our family or dealing with the cesspit of negativity that pollutes social media these days, sometimes we just need a break. A break from the pursuit of higher career advancement or just our jobs, whatever
True.
it is, we need rest. And there is silence to be found in a church, or comfort to be found in the company of a cigar lounge, or maybe just taking a hike in the forest can be very relaxing. But then there is another place where we can find rest, all of us, not just men, and that is in enchantment. For it's in that moment that we are captured by the fairy story, as Tolkien would put it. In the moment that we're captured by that world, we are reminded of so much, like the beauty of our world, the primary world, and man's capacity for virtue. And even sometimes the mundane becomes wondrous in its quality. The hero, he inspires us to be something greater than what we already are. In him, we see the capacity for bravery in a man, even in the most impossible of challenges. The beautiful maiden, so fair that her very gaze, it captures us and inspires a delight in the writing of poetry and the singing of songs, these sad attempts at communicating the love that we have for her mere presence alone. We see the mountains of a world that we cannot touch. We can hear songs of elves that we do not see. We can experience the whisper of gods seated upon high thrones. And suddenly, without even realizing it, we find ourselves hiking in the nearby woods, searching behind hills for secret doors into dwarven halls that stretch for miles beneath the earth. And perhaps some of you guys will laugh because, after all,
True.
none of this is true. And maybe you're right. But
He's right. None of it's true, but I just said it's true because that sense of adventure is true. It's true. And yeah, the search for it, it's constant. Even when we don't know it, it's constant. I mean, like I said, I've driven around before and I'll listen to high fantasy music, whatever it is at the time, Pirates of the Caribbean music, WoW music, Star Wars music, and just get into it. Just feel it. Turn it up all the way. And I'm not listening to some rap or some rock. I'm just listening to some high fantasy orchestra because I just feel like getting immersed in it all.
the quiet
Just
corner of
escaping.
our spirits, whose door we keep shut to the outside world due to embarrassment and our fear of ridicule, a small piece of us, those of us who have experienced enchantment and who have escaped into fantastical worlds, there is this small piece of us that truly wants to believe that somewhere out there, hidden in a place that man has never walked, there is a place where fantasy comes to life in our primary world. And I would say that it's this longing for enchantment, this longing for escape into a secondary world for a time, just to give us reprieve from the woes and stresses and heartaches of this world. That's why we're so drawn to the Dungeons and Dragons table, rolling dice and immersing ourselves into a world that a group of friends have created together to go exploring within. And maybe that's why we dress up and we go to Renaissance fairs, or we put on the armor of our ancestors and we fight on battlefields, letting ourselves fall into the fantastical and romantic realm of the past, or of elves and gods and heroes. And in a curious way, that enchantment that we experience as we don the armor and we pick up the sword or the spear, somehow it manifests itself into the primary world. And suddenly our art galleries are filled with these beautiful paintings of fairies and spirits. Our wardrobe consists of tunics and swords and wizard staffs, and just for the delight of it all, because it's in enchantment and escapism that for a brief moment, we leave who we are and what we know behind, and we rest. And then, we return restored, as Tolkien put it. Restored with a new appreciation for even the most simple and ordinary things. The world, it's bright again and full of color like when we were children. The rustle of the leaves, it's like a language that only the most learned of poets can understand. And although we must endure the doldrums of our days, our world feels more wondrous, because the secondary world of enchantment that we fell into reminds us of just how beautiful life truly is. I admit, everybody, I'm not reading off a script. I'm just rambling from the heart right now, trying to describe something that Tolkien did a far better job at communicating than I ever could. I'll just say that when it comes to good fantasy and role-playing games, whether it's a video game or even a D&D campaign, if you're a DM, you want to create escapism. Speaking as a DM, actually, a creator myself of a secondary world, I've been doing a homebrew campaign for a very long time now. I want my players to be enchanted when they play my game. I want my characters and lands and stories and magic and encounters to really move them in a way, to make them think, to make them wonder, to leave them a little bit in awe. And when we're at the table, I want them to be truly immersed, and I want them to be able to escape into the world that, yes, I have made as the DM, but that they are helping to create. I want the table to be a place of rest for them before they have to go back to work on Monday. And that's my goal anyway. That's my goal as a DM. It's my goal whenever I am playing a video game or watching a movie or whatever. I'm always seeking that enchantment. I'm always seeking that sense of escapism. And it's why I talk about it so much when it comes to gaming. It's why immersion is so important to me. So speaking to game developers out there or any sort of creator that makes...
He's right, immersion is such a big part of it. And that's why I always say, like, a lot of times, yeah, the high-end mythic plussing and the rating, that's all fun for its own thing. But I always tell you guys, my favorite part of an expansion is the beginning. When you're questing through new lands and learning new stories and going on an adventure again for the first time, that first, like, week or two is always my favorite part of an entire expansion. It always is. And I think it always will be. And it's one thing that I feel like maybe World of Warcraft's lost a little bit of over the time because we've revealed so many secrets. Like the Titans used to be this far-off mystery, and the Void Lords used to be this far-off mystery, and the Realm of Death used to be this far-off mystery. And now we've, like, explored it all. Like, we saw the Jailer and his big nipples. We saw the Titans and their throne and their corruption. We saw a Void Lord. We just defeated one. Like, there isn't a lot of mystery left anymore. Now, Blizzard talks about the other side of Azeroth now, and these hints at Avalorn and this unexplored land, and that kind of stuff excites me a bit, because maybe we're going to get some mystery again. Maybe we're going to get some new stories again. But I think that's one problem with a 20-plus-year-old game is, yeah, we've lost some of the mystery and the sense of adventure because we've learned everything. We've explored all the caverns. Sometimes it does feel that way.
Secondary worlds.
Alune is still a mystery.
Goal of immersion, if it is just
that's why she's interesting.
Aside in the favor of achievement points and meaningless grinds and pointless collecting, or for you just making an entire show or movie or book just so that you can make a statement, not to immerse, but to just appease your own ego and your own insecurity with the way things are, I don't think that you're creating a world that enchants. You're not creating a world for people to escape into. I think you're just creating a big waste of time.
What an ending. Look, he's right about a lot of things. I think the whole, like, racial, everyone's too friendly stuff, again, I just feel like, well, they're not really friendly. They're just coming together to defeat a common enemy. I think that's where a lot of that comes from. Again, I go back to corporate greed being the real problem here as to why a lot of high fantasy stories, movies, games have lost some of their high fantasyness. But maybe we'll see a little bit of a return to that as the industry's felt some pains, right? Marvel movies don't make as much as they used to. Games don't make as much as they used to. And maybe we're going to get a soft reset of how stories are told in these forms. And we'll see in the end. But really good video from Nixium. And this sense of adventure. I've talked about it many times, how important it is to me. Maybe we'll get more of that as Metzen returns. We get more stories going forward. Nice video from Nixium, though.